Also wanted to thank Prime Minister, former Prime Minister of Kenya, for his words of wisdom. To get back to your question, do we need to be members of the United Nations? Do African nations need to be members of the United Nations? The answer is a resounding H to the no. Why is that? You must understand why United Nations was created. You must understand why IMF, World Bank, the Bretton Woods institutions were created. You must understand why the World Trade Organization was created. The United Nations, the Bretton Woods institutions, the WTO, they were institutions, among others, that were created after the European tribal wars that they call World War II. Europe, as usual, had destroyed itself, and they needed to rebuild, and they could not afford to rebuild themselves. So it is, in 3 weeks, a few countries came together and created what we now know as World Bank and IMF, as a way of figuring out how to steal from developing nations, majority being Africans, in order to fund Europe. In 1 month, a few nations came together, again organized, for the purposes of rebuilding Europe from its self-destruction and implosion. So it is in 4 weeks, a few nations came up with what we know as the United Nations. That was in 1945. These institutions were never created for the benefit of the greater world. And yet, today, like fools, nations have been invited to become members of the United Nations. For what reason? African nations, an entity that was created to rebuild Europe, are asked to become members, and we are happy to be members of the United Nations. When you look at what African nations are doing when they go to the United Nations year in and year out, African nations are receiving brown envelopes, in some cases just being forced to vote on issues pertaining to other nations, but never African nations. So to answer your question very bluntly and honestly, African nations need to pull out of the United Nations. Yeah. There is nothing there for us. We are there just to be used. We are there for them to say, when they go to the world stage, where Africans present, check. Beyond a check mark, there's nothing else for us. I would hope that one day, African leaders can take a position. If you look at when they were wanting us to be represented at the UN Security Council, we want you Africans to come and be part of the UN Security Council. But like a little boy, come into the room, and by the way, there's a small boy chair for you there. Sit there and be quiet.
You go back again the next year, you go back again, and I'm asking myself, is it because you don't see that that's a small boy chair? And then what about the advisors of the so-called leaders that go there? What are they advising? It's really not rocket science, if the truth be told. So you begin to ask, is there maybe perhaps a document of some sort that the members have signed that doesn't allow them to easily move out of the United Nations?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Maybe we could try the other one? Yes.
Thank you very much. Let me start by agreeing with my sister that this institution, when it was created in 1945, all African countries, excluding Liberia and Ethiopia, were still under colonial rule. So it was created without us. The architecture is against us. That is why you have the permanent members, and the vote of any of those members can veto all other votes. And there is no provision in any of the documents of the UN, whether the Charter or the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that says we cannot leave. The reason why we don't leave is because we are disunited. Because we want to be good little boys. And it's not only the UN that they have created to divide us. The Commonwealth,
Yes.
La Francophonie, the community of Portuguese-speaking countries. The day we organize ourselves under the aegis of the African Union and we speak with a single voice, that is the day we'll recognize that we don't need some of these bodies which gained their legitimacy by having Africans playing what in English is called the gooseberry. You just sit there for it to be said that you are there. So I can't agree more that the time is now for Africa to rethink her membership in many of these organizations. But that requires unity, coherent, common policy on international relations. And the day we define ourselves, then we'll discover that the world will come for us. However you define the world.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So would you say that, in fact, how did Cold War politics actually influence the evolution of democracy in Africa?
Like our conversations earlier, what is democracy in Africa? When you look at the Cold War, I liken that situation to the environment that we are in today, where we are seeing President Trump ushering in a new era in diplomacy, ushering in a new era in politics, ushering in a new era in trade. There are many changes taking place around the world. And when you look at those changes, we must look at them with the perspective of what's in it for us. They often say, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Let's not jump on the bandwagon and follow the trends that some people might say, oh, he's doing this, we don't like it. The one I like the most is when he pulled out USAID.
Yeah.
Do you guys understand how big that is? That's a juggernaut of a relief that has just been brought to Africa. Do you guys realize that?
Did many people actually understand?
Yes.
I think that was the question there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Do people understand what that seemingly benign entity was doing? That entity was not about aid to Africa. That entity was not about poor people. That entity was not about development. Like I said in one of my interviews, that entity in Africa and everywhere they have been, they were a wolf in sheep's clothing. When you see that clinic being built, when you see that school being built, when you see those social programs, take an inventory.
Yeah.
It is never where there is nothing of value. Those entities are being built in areas that are rich in minerals. So while they are running their clinic, guess what they're really doing? They're keeping an eye on that uranium in that area. Who is digging? Why are they digging? Where are they taking their diggings? It is never about the people. It is never about developing anything. It is never about building anything. If it was truly about poor people, guess what? They're having issues with homelessness in California. They're having issues with homelessness in New York City. I know communities all over the South and in the mountain parts of the United States where people still don't have electricity and running water. Hello? So if it's about poor people, we say to USAID, look in your backyard.
That's it.
There are plenty of them there. So let's analyze the environment we live in, whether it is the environment post-Cold War, the environment post-European tribal wars, the environment we are in now with the geopolitics and President Trump pushing his America First agenda. I use an example of what President Trump is doing with the America First agenda. The side effects, the byproducts, though not intended for Africa, are good for Africa. And the biggest gift he gave us is by dissolving USAID. USAID is how the CIA ran some of its operations. USAID is who funded some of the people who are going against the government, people who are within the government, who are on payrolls of foreign nations, people who are undermining our progress are being funded through agencies like USAID. Your own media that is supposed to boom good news about your country are being paid through USAID to spew negative images of your country. I can go on and on and on. Nations have been destroyed through USAID, a simple wolf in sheep clothing. So let's be realistic. Let's understand our NGOs. Let's understand the environment we live in. Let's not be spoon-fed as to what's good for us. Let's use our brains. I am here to say, understand the geopolitics. Let's cherry pick what is good for us and run with it and not be allowed to believe in that which they want us to believe.
That's it. You know, just to add on to what she's saying about USAID, back in 2020, I'll take you back in 2020 when the COVID-19 pandemic, so-called pandemic, actually hit the whole world. USAID played a very vital role. I'm sure you would know that, right? Distributing vaccines. Are you aware, especially if you listen to what she's saying, that USAID was there for a purpose, to monitor? I'll give you an example of the DR Congo. There is unending war only on a certain part of DR Congo. Do you know why? Because they have minerals and rare earths there. They can never settle that war because these so-called USAID NGOs are helping the war-torn area which they have caused. And then we have diseases that are unending. There's this disease in Congo. Ebola. Did you know that they had a cure for Ebola virus? I was shocked. Ebola virus never had a cure for years until one of their very own, God works in mysterious ways, right? One of their very own white person caught Ebola, traveled back to America, and because they were so scared, they cured him on the spot. So I said, oh, what about the ones in Congo? Don't they need the cure also? So it shows you that it's all a lie. Over 300 media houses sponsored by USAID. So bad. Now, Professor Lumumba.
Let me just make a comment on that Ebola issue.
Yes.
When I was still in Washington, there was a meeting of all NGOs around the world to come and see if Ebola could be declared an international emergency. This is after the first big outbreak. Why did these people want Ebola declared an international emergency? Because that's how the monies will be loosened around the world.
Yes.
Ebola wasn't that big of a problem. Now,
just like COVID.
Just like COVID.
Yeah.
Now, this is just me and a few others talking, so don't take it as gospel. But we feel that somewhere intentionally infecting people in that region so they can increase the count to justify that the numbers are increasing. They wanted Ebola declared an international emergency in DRC when it wasn't. And guess what? They got what they wanted. Guess what followed? A lot of NGOs, they left Africa, caught, oh yeah, let's all run to DRC. That's where the money is, because Ebola was declared an international emergency. It's a money-making business for them, using Africans. So we need to be acutely aware of these wolves that are coming to Africa. We do not need any of them. Let them get out of Africa. Let us sink and swim.
Absolutely.
This is our Africa, our way.
That's it. Now, Professor Lumumba, you know, there are so many ways that democracy has either been a lie or it came in a different phase, but obviously we all know what exactly the purpose of it was. Talk about climate change. That's also another way of taking away people's sovereignty away. We're talking about health right now. That's also another way of taking people's sovereignty. When we had COVID, we had nations being asked to sign documents to say that no matter what happens, you'll give us your mines, you'll give us your, your sovereign property. And I thought to myself, I thought you said it was a virus. A virus is in the air. So there's so many ways that African freedoms are being taken away from the people. And one of those major ones also is just the economy. We now live in a multipolar world. There are options, I believe. It's no longer unipolar where we had America just demanding and telling us what to do. But we've also got the BRICS nations that have come up where they are offering something different. You can actually choose. Can Africa find its feet within the multipolar world? And if so, how can Africa also gain its economic sovereignty without actually falling into authoritarianism?
If Africa does not define her agenda will be defined for her. Look at what is happening now. The government of the United States of America is exporting unwanted criminals to the continent of Africa, and we are receiving them gleefully. I saw some go to Eswatini.
Yes.
Some will be exported. The criminals are not good for America, but they are good for Eswatini. And we accept it. Africa will continue to be in this space as long as she is divided into little countries. Benin, Eswatini, Lesotho, Cabo Verde, Comoros. We must speak with one voice. One would have thought that one of the ways in which Africa would do this was initially through the regional economic communities. 14 ECOWAS countries, 14 SADC countries, 8 East African Community. We thought that that would then lead to the African Union, so that when you want to talk to Africa, you talk to Africa in Addis Ababa. And the good doctor said it. Can you imagine that little Qatar calls all African leaders, and they go by private jet? And they go to Qatar in Doha, which is smaller than Lagos. The whole of Qatar is smaller than Lagos.
To sign a peace deal.
To even beyond that, to listen as to how they can have investment in the continent of Africa. But I always say that international relations is the law of the jungle. We must hunt in packs. Wolves hunt in packs. So it is our duty as the continent of Africa to define what we want. If we met in Addis Ababa, the 54 plus countries, and said, from this day henceforth, if you want to deal with us from an economic standpoint, speak to us in Addis Ababa. If you want to know our foreign policy, speak to us. If you want military collaboration, speak to us. If you want all this, speak to us.
Professor, can I come in
please?
There? You spoke about the AU earlier on, and I really understood what you were talking about, because I also attend the African Union Summit every year. 3 different years I was there. They had very interesting topics. One of them being decolonizing the curricula.
Yes.
The other, an education fit for an African. I think it was something like that. In all the occasions that I have gone to the African Union, you're saying that if you want to speak to Africa, come to Addis Ababa. Here's what I found very interesting. We are having an African Union summit, but we have the IMF there saying that we want to sponsor your think tank. I found it very disturbing. So I asked a question. I said, which organization are you from? The IMF. What are you even doing at the African Union in the first place? And then you are here, you're saying you want to sponsor a think tank, not in one country, on the African continent. What nonsense is that? Because we don't have heads to form a think tank. Another thing that was also interesting was that they say that we want to improve the curricula. Listen to this. The theme for that year was decolonizing the curricula and an education fit for an African. We had an American institute that said that they wanted to improve the African curriculum. I thought that was amazing.
Let me tell you, my sister,
disappointing way.
and I'll give you this analogy.
So in actual fact, let me just answer.
Yeah.
My question then becomes, the African leaders themselves, do they even understand really what they're doing? I think I would love to have had even the House Speaker. There was a gentleman who asked a question, how old was the other leader when? He should have been here to answer that question.
Let me also add to that. When we went to I remember one summit, this was in Niger. When we were registering, I just get naughty sometimes. I just go into places I'm not expected to go. But I noticed the room where we were registering, they were mostly white people. And I said, wait a minute. Here we are, they're also using facial recognition registration. So I said, I didn't find out who these white people are. So I just was acting foolish and cracking jokes. And I sat next to one white man. So what are you doing? And the man had a personal cell phone. He's taking pictures of everybody who's getting their IDs. It turned out this was a French company that was hired to register Africa's best, Africa's leaders, let me say.
And collect the data.
And they're collecting the data, including facial recognition. Wow. At the African Union Summit. Why? Couldn't we found an African company that could do this? But all our data, and oh, by the way, who owns that company? The wife of one of the former presidents of France. I rest my case.
Okay, Professor, let me.
Let me, as I answer that question, let me say how happy I am that in this conference I don't have a banner of Western organizations that have sponsored this conference.
And I think that deserves a big round of applause.
And I say that because this is how it begins. It begins this way. And when we make the decision, and allow me this analogy, which I've used elsewhere, that if the sheep knew that is the shepherd who will be eating them one by one, they would rebel against the shepherd, not the wolves. So that when he is chasing the wolves away, it is not for your benefit, it's for fattening you for another day. Until the day that we know that all these organizations fatten Africa for their benefit. My good friend, Dr. Arikana, served, albeit in the United States, as an ambassador of the AU. That organization is almost 70% funded, 90% funded by other organizations. And if our English is still correct, he or she who pays the piper calls the tune. So, but is it not possible if we were to be persuaded? If African governments were to say all African governments charge something called VAT, suppose we were to say that if it is 16% VAT, 2% will go to 1% to regional organization, 1% to the African Union. We would fund African Union. Then we would begin to prioritize what we do. What you see in Addis Ababa every year is an annual jamboree where people meet to read speeches which have been written for them. And then they wait for another. Take, for example, the year 2020 was the year of silencing of the guns. The guns are allowed.
Yes.
We are in the month of July, 4 months away. This year will have ended. This is the year of the African Union for reparations. How many of you have heard about that theme?
No, reparations
Very few.
have not come to
So
Africa.
the truth is that we must rethink. And I want to conclude with this. What Europe and America and others do is also to recruit some from within our ranks, to torpedo the good that we are doing. The fifth columnists. So we must be aware. Who do we initiate? We must make a solemn decision that we have African meetings where there is nobody but Africans. It is not going to be easy. Let's remind ourselves. It is going to be 5 steps forward, 2 backwards, but we are moving. It is intergenerational. It is once you recognize that, then you'll not be worried. My good friend, Dr. Obi there, told us she's been in this space. We've been in this space. Yours is to take over the baton and run your leg. Your children and children's children, it is an intergenerational war and fight.
Yeah.
But it must be fought and it must be won. And I conclude by saying, when I see us, how did we get to know each other? How did I get to know all this? We are discovering ourselves. So the journey is on, but there are potholes along the way. But we must move on.
Yes.
And move on, we will.
Okay, so, okay, you want to add on? All right.
I need to share a personal experience to emphasize the point he just made. I was at an African Union Peace and Security meeting where we are supposed to be discussing peace and security issues on the continent. So when I walked into the room, I thought to myself, wait a minute, we're talking about peace and security in Africa. What are these people doing here? And so I waited for a chance to sneak in. So I raised my question, and I wanted to know if we're discussing issues to do with peace and security in Africa. I turned around and I looked at all of them and I said, why are they here? Are we invited to European peace and security meetings?
Absolutely not.
The sister who was moderating the session got so mad at me, she called for a break. And during the break, she had the audacity to come to me and accuse me of messing up her session. Lies our problem. And the sister happened to be working for the United Nations as a country representative in Kenya. Thank you.